Spider-Man is a cultural icon, generally regarded as Marvel's most popular superhero of all time. At the time of this video, he's had 12 TV shows. But what you may not know is that one of these is not like the other. One of these was made in Japan, and not only is it a huge departure from typical Spider-Man, it's kind of the reason Power Rangers exists. So if I've grabbed your attention, let's talk about Japanese Spider-Man.
Spiderman. Spiderman.
Okay, so you're probably wondering why Japan of all places would make a live-action Spider-Man series in 1978. Well, back in the day, Marvel Comics and Toei, the company that owned what would become Super Sentai, as well as Kamen Rider, made a deal to utilize each other's properties for a 3-year period. For those who don't know, Super Sentai is a Japanese property they would use the footage of to make Power Rangers, and this series has a lot of ties to it. The first thing Toei did was begin production on a show utilizing the popular character Spider-Man. Now I say utilizing because initially, it wasn't going to star Spider-Man. Rather, the initial concept was to feature legendary Japanese figure Yamato Takeru as the leading role, having time travel to the future, with Spider-Man being his sidekick. Now the idea of Spider-Man being the sidekick to a time-traveling ancient Japanese hero and fighting crime together is so ludicrous that it's great, but they decided to drop that angle and make the show purely about Spider-Man. But who is this Spider-Man and what makes him stand out from the rest? Our main character is not Peter Parker, but Takuya Yamashiro, played by Shinji Todo. He would go on to play General Herder in Denzi Man. Takuya is just an average 22-year-old motocross racer. He has a reporter girlfriend, Hitomi, an older sister, Shinko, a younger brother, Takuji, and a scientist dad. But one day, Takuya starts hearing weird voices calling for someone and summoning something called the Marveler. Suddenly, a spaceship comes from outer space and crashes into a nearby mountain. We cut to the villains of the series, the Iron Cross Army, growing concerned that the arrival of the Marveler could interfere with their plans for world conquest, especially if Takuya's dad finds it. So as Takuya's dad goes searching for the crash site, the Iron Cross Army moves in to kill him, all the while Takuya is being lured by visions of spiders. He arrives too late, however, to find his father dying, and after giving him a warning about the Iron Cross Army, he dies in Takuya's arms. There is no time to grieve, however, as Takuya is attacked soon afterwards, grievously injured, and falls down a hole, finding himself with Garia, the last survivor of Planet Spider. Garia is the source of the voices and visions Takuya has been hearing, and is the arch-enemy of the Iron Cross Army after they invaded his planet 400 years ago. Garia chased after them and arrived on Earth, where he somehow got trapped in this cave filled with poisonous spiders, and waited for centuries for someone to heed his call. Takuya turns out to be that someone, and thus Garia saves his life with the spider bracelet, injecting him with the spider extract. This alters Takuya's body, giving him the powers of Spider-Man. Garia asks Takuya to fulfill his 400-year vengeance, and from weakness, turns into a spider. He's still alive at this point, talking to Takuya telepathically, but he does die in episode 2, so it isn't for long. It is long enough, however, to teach Takuya about the Spider Protector, a suit Takuya can spring from his bracelet to become Spider-Man. He also says to call the Marveler whenever he's in trouble. With his new spider powers, Takuya goes after the Iron Cross Army, saves a scientist, and comes face to face with the Iron Cross Army's Monster of the Week, collectively known as the Machine Bem. Unfortunately, Machine Bem have the innate ability to turn giant, so Takuya calls on the Marveler for assistance. The spaceship from before starts moving and flies in to help. Now you might think Spider-Man could board a spaceship by shooting a web and swinging up to it, but no. the Marveler sends out Spider-Man's personal flying car, the Spider Machine GP-7. It also shoots missiles. Using the GP-7 to board the Marveler, Spider-Man activates its transformation, turning into the mighty mecha Leopardon. With Leopardon, the Machine Man is easily vanquished, and the leader of the Iron Cross Army, Professor Monster, declares that he will be victorious. Spider-Man drives off to declaring a campaign of vengeance for his father and Garia as Episode 1 comes to a close. Now, I say Episode 1 as if there's a lot that happens as the show goes on, but honestly, I just told you around 90% of the plot. Almost every episode is completely standalone and could be watched in any order. Spider-Man either discovers something himself, runs into another character who gets involved with the Iron Cross Army, or the Iron Cross Army goes on the attack against him. It's pretty simple stuff. The draw of the series really isn't the story though, so let's talk a bit about the characters. Takuya makes for a great Spider-Man, and while simple, I think he comes across as a very likable character. In his civilian life, Takuya is frequently seen trying his best to be a reliable brother to his siblings after the death of their father. While clearly filled with anger and a thirst for vengeance towards the Iron Cross Army, something the narrator will constantly remind you of throughout the series, he never lets it become his character. You get the impression that he would strive to stop the Iron Cross Army, even without the revenge aspect. While not perfect, he exhibits heroic qualities and has a real drive to stop evil. Heck, he isn't even a vigilante. Spider-Man actually becomes an honorary member of the CIA. This happens in the movie that takes place between episodes 10 and 11. I say movie, but it's really just a glorified episode. Another cool thing about Takuya is how quick he is to suspect the Iron Cross Army is up to no good. He takes them very seriously, to the point that he's aware how obvious it would be for him to be Spider-Man. He should be dead after his encounter with them after all, and he has the motivation. So Takuya goes out of his way to act completely incompetent to throw the Iron Cross Army off. This causes him to get berated by his family and girlfriend, and you can really feel for him sometimes. You really wish Takuya had the chance to just reveal himself and show them how seriously he takes his hero work. Instead of making quips, any chance he has to talk to his enemy is usually a declaration of how he will defeat them. The series narrator constantly describes him as being vengeful or burning with anger, but despite all of this, he never gets the impression of being any kind of anti-hero, nor are there any times where he finds himself overcome by his anger. Quick side note, the series narrator is Toru Ohira, who played Emperor Bacchus in O-Ranger and narrated every series from Go Ranger to Dynaman, and then Return for Z-Ranger. Another thing that differentiates this Spider-Man is his powers. Sure, he has the usual web and wall crawling powers, as well as increased strength and speed, but that's where the similarities end. While he has a spider sense, in this series it acts more like a radar where Spider-Man can detect where shenanigans are going down. It's pretty loosely defined. So loose that Spider-Man can apparently use it to see the future. Apart from future vision, he also has night and x-ray vision. Finally, this Spider-Man comes with an impressive healing factor. Nothing like Wolverine or Deadpool, but enough to recover from major injuries in a day. The differences also come in the shape of weaknesses. Nothing too specific, there's no spider kryptonite in this series, but the Iron Cross Army will attempt to defeat Spider-Man by using things that are harmful to real spiders. One last spider-themed thing I like about this series is Spider-Man's walk. Apparently, they instructed the suit actor to walk low to the ground with his arms out to be more spider-like. It's goofy, and I love it. While he probably couldn't beat Peter Parker in the fight, it's nice to see a different take on the character that embraces the more spidery aspects. Rather than a normal catchphrase, Spider-Man always has a scene where he introduces himself and will commonly change what he says according to the situation. If there are kidnapped children, for example, he will say, "I'm the savior of children, Spider-Man." This itself can often produce greatly specific results, such as, "The man who will prevent a major blackout in Tokyo, Spider-Man." But when he can't think of anything, his default catchphrase is, "The emissary of hell, Spider-Man." This Spider-Man isn't out to send the bad guys to jail. Takuya knows these guys are irredeemable and responsible for killing countless people. When he says he's there to send them to hell for their sins, he means it. But I haven't really talked about said bad guys yet, so let's switch over and introduce them. The main villain of the series is Professor Monster. Yes, really, Professor Monster. He's played by Mitsuo Ando, who was the Black Cross Führer in Go Ranger. I guess he just liked evil crosses. He's the leader of the Iron Cross Army, and after attacking several planets, made his way to Earth in order to perfect his creations, the Machine Bem. For most of the series, his role is just to sit in his chair and give orders. He doesn't really do much himself, which is understandable for an evil mastermind, but his second-in-command feels like the real antagonist of the series. Said second-in-command is Amazonas, played by Yukie Kagawa. She would go on to play the character Amazonas Killer in Sun Vulcan. In the same way Mitsuo Ando got typecasted for crosses, Yukie Kagawa must have gotten typecasted for Amazons. Amazonas is actually rather competent compared to what you might think though. At the start of the series, she is the editor-in-chief of the company Takuya's girlfriend works at. The moment she notices Hitomi always seems to be around whenever Spider-Man shows up, she tries to use her as a hostage. This occurs only 4 episodes in. She even puts it together very quickly that Takuya should be super dead, and has a pretty good motive for being Spider-Man. She suggests killing him numerous times throughout the series, but for some reason Professor Monster is always against it. Later on in the series, her cover as editor-in-chief is blown, but she would continue on as always, coming up with schemes either to benefit the Iron Cross Army, or just to kill Spider-Man. She would also change her hair color for no reason, and then change it back for also no reason. I don't have any idea why they did this, and it's never brought up in the series. Nevertheless, I've seen far more incompetent characters in her role, so while not a complex character, Amazonas gets a pass. The Machine Bem on the other hand, the Machine Bem are generally some kind of part organic, part mechanical monster, but there are times where this rule is broken. Honestly, there isn't much to talk about regarding them, as a lot of the time they aren't given any kind of personality, to the point where there are even some episodes that don't have them. Heck, there are some episodes where the inclusion of a Machine Bem feels like an afterthought. While there are instances where the Machine Bem is the primary focus of an episode, these are few and far between. Oh, and I can't forget to talk about the henchmen, apparently called Ninders. These guys are goofy fun, and I like them a lot. Okay, let's finally address the elephant in the room. The giant metal transforming elephant. You're probably wondering why Spider-Man has a giant robot. Well, what you need to remember is that this series was made in the 70s. This was peak super robot cartoon era. So when they were thinking of a way to get the show a hook, something to really get the kids, they added a giant robot. The thing that always puzzled me is why is it leopard themed? It's not even consistently leopard themed, it just has the head of one on its Marveler form. It's never brought up. Maybe Garia had a pet space leopard and built Leopardon in its honor. It's barely spider themed too, it just has some web patterns on it. I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if they had the design first, and then just put it into the show regardless of if it fit. I also have no idea why Spider-Man has a car specifically. The GP7 frequently features Spider-Man's mode of transportation, but I have no idea why it's part of the Leopardon package, and not a motorcycle. Regardless, I like Leopardon despite not really fitting in with the setting. It actually has quite the arsenal too. While in Marveler form it can attack with cannons, but transformed, it has rocket fists, laser eyes, its own version of the spider string. It can launch the crest on its head as an attack, called the Arc Turn, and then there's the finishing move. Leopardon's finisher is Sword Vigor. Now does he do a cool slash move or maybe a stab? No. Leopardon charges up his energy into his mighty sword and throws it at the enemy, as you do with swords. It does kill everything in one hit though. Leopardon also has a record of being practically indestructible, tanking all attacks and never having any trouble in fights. Now why is Leopardon so awesome? Put simply, he had to be because of the show's low budget. This show didn't really have a large budget, so they couldn't do anything super fancy with the effects. Apparently, the Leopardon costume also made all the Machine Bem look too small, so they couldn't show both of them on screen a lot of the time. This already meant the fights had to be very simple, but then it got worse. Partway through production, the Leopardon costume either got destroyed, or stolen, and they didn't have the money to replace it. So eventually, every fight in the series starts relying on stock footage. Spider-Man will summon Marveler, transform, the machine gun will attack, cue footage of Leopardon walking through the attack, maybe throw in an arc turn, and finish the fight off with sword vigor. Done. There's a few things about the show that are pretty low budget, though in my opinion it serves to make the show better. I generally feel that a lot of the show's enjoyment is from taking in its quirks and enjoying how bad it is. One of my favorites is the transformation scene. When Takuya turns into Spider-Man, he calls out for the suit and it just drops in front of him. Like they just hang the flaccid suit in front of the actor and cut to him zipping it up and wearing it. Speaking of hanging, you can see some of the strings the Marveler model uses as it rises out of the ground. Though credit where credit is due, you can't see a lot of the strings when Spider-Man is climbing. I mean, you can in some, but in others they pull it off pretty well. Although one of Spider-Man's quirks is climbing up something, climbing across something, and then just climbing down, not really accomplishing anything. Another Spider-Man quirk? He doesn't really hit his enemies often. Instead, he likes to throw henchmen around or neutralize them with his web. A hallmark of the series is actually the triple loop, where they like to emphasize actions by replaying the shot 3 different times or by showing it from different angles. I personally think it's very fun, and hey, do we need to show our monster growing? Just take a picture of it and stretch it. Even with the low budget though, they managed to come up with some good, if not funny episode concepts. I couldn't possibly tell you all of the ones that stand out, as this would become me giving a description of almost every episode, but for reference, in episode 7, the Iron Cross Army tries to defeat Spider-Man by using sound waves that hurt spiders. They popularized the song Spider-Man Boogie so that it plays everywhere and drives Takuya nuts. In episode 8, the Iron Cross Army revives the evil spirit of a 200-year-old cat as a machine bam. In episode 9, an insect machine bam is treated nicely by Takuya's sister Hitomi and falls in love with her. While you won't be getting much in these episodes in way of plot, it's always fun to see what concept they go with. Now, throughout this series I've kept bringing up Super Sentai, and I also said that this series is kind of the reason for Power Rangers, while the 2 Sentai series produced before this were Go Ranger and Jaka. Now these series are what you would expect. 5 heroes, different colors, monster of the week, etc. But no giant robot. That's because that trend started here. It was this series that started the monster growing large and fighting the giant robot trend. The next series, Battle Fever J, would use the popularity of Leopardon and start including their own giant robot, and rebrand the franchise as Super Sentai. This would cause every future series to follow suit, and greatly help its popularity. If it weren't for Japanese Spider-Man, there wouldn't be a Megazord. This series might as well be the 2.5 Super Sentai series for its contribution. Let's finish this video off with how the series ends. Episode 35 is where you can consider the series ending starts, at the arrival of 2 characters. 2 10-million-year-old mummies from the Amazon arrive at a local museum. Professor Monster kidnaps them and revives them as evil minions named Bella and Rita. They then ambush Spider-Man dressed as nuns. Then we skip to episode 41, the last episode of the series. Spider-Man is on a roll destroying Iron Cross Army bases, so they launch an attack on Interpol in hopes of destroying the info on where their bases are. Meanwhile, Amazonas is forming a rivalry with Bella and Rita, and Professor Monster has gotten tired of her constant failures. Amazonas then decides to just attack Takuya in his home and hold Hitomi hostage, confident that this will prove Takuya is Spider-Man. It's actually kinda cool to see the home of the main character, a safe place throughout the series, filled with enemies. She almost succeeds in killing him, but upon it being revealed he survived, Professor Monster has her killed, and Amazon screws up their plans as a final act of revenge. We then get the climactic final battle between Spider-Man and Professor Monster. The theme song plays, Spider-Man fights a ton of henchmen, defeats Bella and Rita, and confronts Monster himself in hand-to-hand combat. Monster grows giant and Spider-Man just summons Leopardon and one-hits him. Yeah, it's kind of anticlimactic. Even at the end, the narrator is just like, Yep, it's over. Spider-Man won. I really wish this was given more, but talking straight into the sunset victorious isn't the worst way to go out. It does kind of bother me that his family never found out he's Spider-Man though. It would have been a great moment. Despite some of its faults, Japanese Spider-Man is great. While light on plot or character development, it's good fun to just pick an episode and turn your brain off. It's peak so bad it's good. So if you are looking for something to watch, a tokusatsu fan, a Spider-Man fan, a fan of bad movies, or maybe just looking for something weird, I think I can recommend this series to you. So go check out a different take on a classic character.